Whether you're chasing whitetails in the Midwest or tracking moose in the Rockies, one question matters most. Do you have enough gun? Today we're going to break down what it really takes to ethically hunt deer, elk, moose, and bear. No hype, just the facts. So buckle up. Hi everybody, welcome to LocaCarnivore. Glad you could join us today. Famed big game hunter and author Robert Ruark once advised everybody to use enough gun. That's what we're going to talk about today, is using enough gun. What constitutes enough gun, and what are the cartridges that you can use to ethically take big game species? We're going to deal with the primary ones you're going to find in North America. Sorry folks for hunting Africa or Asia. You'll just have to pinch hit. We'll do another video at some point, I think, maybe on those kind of species. But for today, we're going to deal with those North American species. We're going to talk about bear, all the species of bear, black bear, grizz, polar bear. And we're going to move into moose, because they're kind of unique. They have their own requirements. And we're going to talk about elk, the wapiti, the bullet sponge, as I like to call them, the Rocky Mountain bullet sponge. And then we're going to talk about deer, both mule deer and whitetail deer. So make sure you stay with us all the way through the end of the video. You deer hunters, you're just going to have to stick with us through it all the way to the end. And at the end, I'm going to give you my pick for the most versatile, best all-around cartridge if you're going to hunt multiple species on the same hunt. And that's not unusual, especially out west. You could have a deer tag, an elk tag, and a pronghorn tag, and maybe a bear tag all in your pocket at the same time. So the question is, what gun would you use? So at the end of the video, I'm going to give you my number one pick for the most versatile all-arounder. So stick with us. Well, first of all, what does it mean to ethically take a game animal? Frankly, in my opinion, that animal should go down either right in its tracks or not really dash off very far at all. Maybe a 50-yard dash, if that, and piles up and expires, and that's the end of it. As a hunter, we have responsibilities to the animals that we hunt. After all, we carry the power of life and death with us in our hands in the form of our weapons, our rifles. So what cartridges do we need for each type of species? Now keep in mind, of course, bullet placement is king in this operation. You've got to put that bullet in the right spot. I don't care what you're shooting, how powerful it is. If you don't have the accuracy, it's pretty worthless. So with the placement issue handled, we have to turn our attention to just how much power do we need for this? How much energy and impact on that animal is going to be enough to make sure that we do the job right the first time. I'm going to break down for you the minimum required energy for each species. So as we talk about each species, I'll discuss what the minimums are required for that species. And the first thing we're going to start off with is bear. Bears are kind of unique. Yeah, you may not necessarily need a huge amount of energy, especially on an average North American black bear. You might not need tons of energy. In fact, a lot of people hunt them with standard deer type cartridges. That's perfectly ethical as long as they put the bullet in the correct place and do their job properly. But bears are, even the smaller species like the black bear, they're pretty tough animals. They really are. They're very durable, and they have a lot of heavy fur, which acts as sort of like a kind of a Kevlar, if you will. It does play a little bit of a havoc with bullets as they get into that fur. They're not bulletproof by any means, but that fur can cause some problems with certain bullets, especially if it's too light, too frangible of a bullet. And then they have a lot of, especially if you're hunting them in the fall, they have a lot of body fat, and fat just soaks up energy. I don't know what it is, but it's really a good energy absorbing material. So you're going to have even less energy after the bullet goes through the fat layer. And then you've got muscle. Boy, bears are really muscled, especially the brown bears and the polar bears. Lots of muscle on these animals. And their bones are consequently quite heavy to support all that muscle. So you need a lot of power for this. Now, I'm going to break this down into basically black bear hunting and then brown bear hunting, or brown and polar bear hunting. Now, black bears, as a general rule, I'd like to see a minimum of 1,500 foot-pounds of energy at impact. So again, all these energy figures are going to be at impact on the animal. So you've got to decide what range you're hunting these animals at, and then make sure that that bullet you're firing, given its ballistic coefficient, the velocity it leaves the rifle, etc., has enough energy by the time it gets downrange to the target to still do the job correctly. So at 1,500 foot-pounds, that's kind of really my floor for the black bear. You can do it with a little less, admittedly, and people have done it and do it probably all the time, frankly, but to really make sure you got the job done right, I would go with 1,500 foot-pounds. Now, when we move up to brown bears, so interior grizzlies in the lower 48, interior brown bears, grizzlies in Alaska, Canada, and then of course you get to the coastal brown bears in Alaska, and then the big Kodiaks out on Kodiak Island. Completely different situation. Then polar bears, I kind of put polar bears in that same category because of their body weight as you would a Kodiak or a coastal brown bear. Now these animals are large. They can go up to close to a ton of bear. I mean, that's a lot of bear. So you need a lot of energy. So for those bears, I like 2,000 foot-pounds. I really want to see at least 2,000 foot-pounds at impact. So let's run down a few cartridges that are really good for those species. Now for black bear, really your standard hunting cartridges are quite good. 308, 270, 30-06. You can go up to 300 Win Mag, no problem. In fact, there's no such thing as too much power on bear, so I will not argue with any powerful cartridge you want to use, even if it's just for black bear. But we want guns that are going to shoot those bullets at about, the muzzle energy is going to be in the 2,500 foot-pounds at the lower end, maybe 2,600 foot-pounds on up. So, and then 3,000 to 3,500 is very nice, very nice. And then of course you're going to have to look at your particular load and the ballistic coefficient and everything. But these guns, as usual, these type of calibers will generally still deliver around 2,000 to maybe 1,500, 2,000 foot-pounds at 300 yards. And it depends on how far out you're shooting your bear. If you're shooting your bear at close range, out of a tree stand, over bait or something like that, then just look at your muzzle energy and maybe your 100-yard energy, and you should be golden on that. Now, if you get out into some parts of the West, or in Alaska, especially interior Alaska, where it's out on the tundra type country, not unusual to have to take longer shots at these bears. So you still want a gun that's going to perform even out to maybe 500 yards. I'm not a big fan of shooting bears at those kind of ranges, but if that's the shot you have, and you're confident and you have the equipment that you can make that shot, then you're fine. I would stick, if for those longer shots, I'd go like 7mm Remington Magnum, something in that range, or 300 Win Mag. Those are still going to give you a good 1,500, maybe even more foot-pounds of energy at 500 yards, and they're certainly going to be adequate inside of that. So those would be my recommendations for black bear. Now, if you get into brown bear hunting, and let's talk interior grizzlies in Alaska, the basic cartridges, again, I'd like to see 2,000 foot-pounds on impact. So if you're going to use some of the lighter calibers, 30-06 or 308 or something like that, you're going to have to be close in. You want to be about 100 yards or less to make sure that you've got enough energy there. If you're going to have to shoot out further on those bears, I would step up to 300 Win Mag, 338 Win Mag, 375 H&H, Holland & Holland, and one of my favorites for these big bears, the 416 Remington Magnum. And everybody's like, wow, that's an elephant gun. Well, I'll tell you what, you're dealing with dangerous game here. You want something that you would be confident to take on a Cape buffalo hunt or something like that. These animals, if you don't do it right, they'll kill you, quite frankly. They will. It happens every single year. They maul and kill a hunter that screwed up. Somehow they made a mistake and they got mauled and they got killed. So don't underestimate these animals. They're incredibly dangerous up close. But having said that, you still need to maybe reach out. So the 375 H&H and the 416s, as opposed to like the 458s, things like that, they have enough reach. They're still making, at 500 yards, they're still making at least roughly 2,000 foot-pounds, maybe a little less, but they're pretty close. And at 300 yards, they're golden. So if you've got that longer shot across the tundra at one of these bears, that 375 or 338, 300 Win Mag, or the 416 Remington Magnum will get the job done at those ranges. So those would be my choices for those animals for hunting bears. Now, before we move on into our next topic area, which would be moose, let's have a quick discussion about bullet construction, because this is really important. In fact, I think it's almost more important than the actual cartridge you're using and even the energy you're imparting, because if the bullet doesn't perform correctly, you can have real problems. Frankly, I like to see people hunting with a good bonded type bullet or a monometal like a Barnes or something like that, that is going to stay together and hold its mass and give you good penetration. Especially when you're talking these larger species or the dangerous game species, we want good penetration. Yes, you still need expansion. You want proper energy transfer into the animal for a maximum wounding effect to get that animal down as quick as possible. Therefore, you really should have a heavy bonded bullet. And I like heavy for caliber bullets too, frankly. All these calibers I'm mentioning are cartridges. Just think the heavier bullets, like 308, 165 grain, 306, 180 grain, even 200 grain, 300 Win Mag, 180 grain, 375 H&H, 300 grain, and you get down to like 243 or something like that. 100 grain, even 110 if you can find one, something like that. You want a heavy bullet. That gives you also a higher ballistic coefficient, which gives you more energy retention downrange, which improves your situation quite a bit as well. And you know what else is important? That's making sure that 2A and hunting content stays on YouTube, because YouTube is trying roundabout to get rid of us, basically, one way or the other. And what can you do? You can share this video, and you can share all the hunting and gun videos that you watch to make sure that all the creators in this space get as much coverage and as much viewership as possible, because the more viewers we have, the more YouTube sees that we're profitable for them, and they're more incentivized to keep us. So if you want this type of content on YouTube, share the video. Let's talk moose for a little bit, shall we? Moose are big animals, depending on, there's different subspecies of them, and frankly, as you go further south in North America, yes, as you go further south in North America, they get a little smaller. So the ones way up north, Alaska, Canada, those are big, bruising moose for the most part. You get down into like, Wyoming, Colorado, places like that, they're a little smaller. But by smaller, I mean instead of 1,200 or 1,300 pounds, you have a 1,000-pound animal or a 900-pound animal. These are not tiny creatures. Now, moose are not quite as bullet resistant as elk seem to be. Elk are just really durable. We'll talk about that when we come into the elk section. But while moose are not necessarily as durable as an elk, you still have to respect them. They're a big, huge animal, and if you've got like a shot in the timber where you have to send a quartering shot in through that shoulder or something like that, there's just a ton of bone there and a ton of muscle, and they've got pretty heavy fur on them too, as a matter of fact. Much heavier coats generally than your average elk or deer has. So there's a lot of hair there you have to deal with. So you want, again, a really well-constructed bullet. But you don't need to go super exotic. Again, I like to see for moose 1,500 foot-pounds of energy at impact. So that's going to be lots of really basic cartridges. A 270 is fine with a 150 grain or 160 grain bullet. 30-06 with a 180 or 200 grain bullet. 308, I'd like to minimum 165 grain. I'd like to see with a 180 if you can find one, and there's plenty of them out there. So 180 grain. 375 Holland & Holland, fantastic cartridge for moose. And if you happen to be up in Alaska and you're hunting brown bear and you also have a moose tag, take that 416 Remington Magnum with you. Again, like I said, it hits way out. Moose generally are shot fairly close, but it's not unusual to see sometimes having to shoot 400 yards on a moose. It's not that uncommon, depending on the area and the terrain and the foliage that you're hunting in. So it's not unusual. So you have to have a gun that's kind of pretty versatile. If you're really going to be just in the timber, I'd go with a 45-70 and a good lever gun. Now, the traditional load is a little down on energy. I mean, you're talking like maybe 2,000 foot-pounds at the muzzle, maybe a little less. But it's still pretty adequate. And of course, you can get those higher powered rounds if you've got a modern lever action gun. You can get those magnumized, if you will, 45-70. Those are a really good choice as well. But again, moose, respect them, but you don't need, you don't need an earth mover if you don't have one. If all you've got is an .6 or a 308 or 7 Rem Mag, go out there, but take a heavy bullet and make sure you put it in the right spot and get close if you can. Another thing you can do is you can support us on our Patreon. We have a link down in the description there, and if you want more content, shuffle on over to our LocaCarnivore website, LocaCarnivore.com, and while you're there reading all the groovy stuff, you can hit the store tab at the top of the screen and you can get some of this really nice LocaCarnivore merchandise. Next up, we're going to talk wapiti. That's right, elk. Now, those of you who have hunted elk know what I'm talking about here, but elk, in my opinion, is one of the premier game species on the planet. Fantastic animal. They are difficult to track down, difficult to get a shot on, and then when you do shoot them, they have a tendency of absorbing huge amounts of damage and just keep on trucking. I once saw a hunter fling a 340 Weatherby Magnum through a elk at a reasonable distance, and it was a solid shot. I mean, double lunged this thing, And it's still, we were above tree line, or roughly at tree line, so it's 10,000 feet in the Colorado Rockies. This thing ran uphill in what was for us about almost thigh-deep snow in spots. It ran uphill for, I don't know, about a quarter of a mile into a bunch of timber before it puddled around again and finally collapsed and expired. So that's the kind of animal you're dealing with. They can just survive huge amounts of damage. So again, there's, like bear to a certain degree, you can't have enough power with an elk, in my opinion. That said, though, do you need huge amounts of power? And do you have to put up with a lot of recoil? And by the way, let's talk about recoil for a minute. Recoil is generally a pain and it degrades your accuracy. I just recently did a video on 12 fantastic low recoil rounds for elk that are elk capable, and I'll put the link down in the description. You go watch that if you're not in the mood to get slapped around with magnums. Now, for the rest of us who've seen this movie before and we know how much power we need to bring to bear, what kind of cartridges? If you're going to be fairly enclose, like inside 300 yards, 308's fine. I would go even 6.5 Creedmoor with good placement and a good bullet. You can get into that range. And then, of course, 30-06, 7mm Remington Magnum, and of course, one of my favorites, the 300 Win Mag. It's a fantastic cartridge. Again, you're going to have to think about your range on your elk, and that's going to dictate the cartridge more than anything, in my opinion. If you're going to have to make some shots that are going to be beyond 300 yards, I'd say especially beyond 400 yards, you're going to have to be in the magnums. You're going to need a 7 Rem Mag with a good bullet, like 175 grain, 300 Win Mag with a 180 or 200 grain bullet. Don't be afraid to take that 375 Holland & Holland if that's what you've got. That's a good cartridge too, and it will definitely anchor elk out to about that 500 yard mark. Now, you do need to use a high BC bullet though in your 375 H&H. If you use the run-of-the-mill bullets or you don't launch them at a good velocity, you're not going to get the energy all the way out there. So that's kind of a caveat with the 375 H&H. But otherwise, those cartridges I just mentioned, those are going to be fantastic. And 338 Win Mag, I can't forget. Every time I leave out a 338, boy, I get hate mail in the comments section. I get, you left out my 338, oh, no. So if it's 338, excellent cartridge. 225 grain bullet would be my recommendation, or 250 grain, fantastic cartridge on elk. Heck, Elmer Keith came up with a 338 Win Mag specifically to hunt elk. So what greater endorsement can you get for a cartridge? All right, you deer hunters, your time is now. And the other thing you need to do right now is give us a big like on this video, help us with our stats. We want you on the LocaCarnivore team, so please subscribe and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of our fantastic videos in the future. Deer. What kind of energy do we need on deer? Well, I'll tell you, they come in two flavors, whitetails and mule deer. And mule deer run a little on the larger side. In fact, you can get some real big bruisers upside in British Columbia and other parts, like in some parts of Montana and Idaho. 300 pounds on a buck is not unusual. It does happen, so you got to think about that. You almost might want an elk gun for mule deer, frankly. Whitetails, they're not very durable, they're light-bodied, but boy, do they like to run when they're shot. If they're not anchored immediately, they will dash off and try to hide from you. So even if they're just running dead and don't know it yet, they will go a long ways. So I still want to see some good power. Minimum floor on whitetails, 243 with 100 grain, 110 grain bullet again. And keep your ranges sensible. 6.5 Creedmoor, that's a good cartridge for whitetails. It really is a superb cartridge for whitetail deer. And you can reach out all the way to 500 yards on a whitetail with a 6.5 Creed. Really good cartridge and polite at the shoulder, accurate. And then, of course, your traditional, your usual suspects, 270, 308, 30-06. I wouldn't hesitate with a proper bullet, with a well-constructed bullet, to use a 300 Win Mag on whitetails. I have done it. And no, I didn't blow it up into tiny, tiny pieces. You people that think magnums are too much for whitetails, just shut up. I'm not going to listen to you because I've used I've used magnums. I've even used 375 Holland & Holland on whitetails. And this is not a problem with a proper bullet that doesn't just explode on impact. Proper bullet, properly constructed, magnums, they aren't going to blow your animal up and leave you with 3 pieces of meat for dinner. So just get over it. Mule deer, they're a little bit bigger. Like to see at a minimum 1,200 foot-pounds of energy at impact. Now muleys, they are a bit bigger, and frankly, I think they're a little bit tougher. I mean, muleys take a little more punishment, really, than your average whitetail. They're not quite as delicate, and they're just built heavier. So, but your average cartridges will still do the job at appropriate range. So 6.5 Creedmoor, excuse me, 308, 270. 270 is brilliant on mule deer. 300 Win Mag, 7mm Rem Mag, and 375 Holland Holland. Any of those will do just fine on mule deer. But your ranges are going to be a bit longer, so make sure you've got enough energy out to where you're going to have to shoot these things. Because mule deer tend to shoot them in more open country. The closest shot I've ever had on a mule deer was probably maybe about 50 yards, and I've had to nail them at 200 plus. That's not unusual. So bring enough gun that has enough reach for your mule deer hunt. What cartridges do you like for each of these species? For bear, for moose, for elk, for deer? Go down in the comments, tell us your story. I love to hear from you folks. I mean, you've got the most brilliant things to say. Well, most of you, a few of you, not so much, but most of you just have really wonderful insights. I learned so much from each of you. So do go down in the comments and share with everybody, please. All right, welcome to our bonus section. Before I get into my recommendation for the one cartridge that will do it all, if there is such a thing, here's your bonus section, and that is, what kind of rifle are we going to use? Well, I'll tell you what. I don't have any affiliate things going on right now. I don't have any relationships with these brands, so I'm just going to rattle off a few things, and if you like that brand, that's fine. If you don't like that, go get something else. I'm not pitching anything for anybody. But basically, let's be realistic. Hunting costs money, and rifles are really getting expensive. So I like to go for budget-minded rifles. In fact, I did a video, I'll put the link down in the description there, on finding a budget rifle. What is a good budget hunting rifle? But I'll just rattle off a couple for you. The Savage Access is good. I'm really big on the Ruger American, especially the Ruger American 2.0 or Gen 2, whatever you want to call it. The first gens are they're pretty good rifles, but the safety doesn't lock the bolt on them, so I'm not super big on that, frankly. Whether it be Vanguard series, any of these type of guns, and the Winchester with XPR, those are all really good guns, and they're really affordable, at least comparatively speaking. Having said that, though, if you've got the money, the better the gun you get, as long as it shoots good, the better gun you get, the better and happier you will be down the road. But those basic bread and butter guns for the average person, really can't say enough about them. I like them, I hunt with them, and as long as they hit, who cares? It doesn't have to be fancy, right? Besides, you get it out in the field, you're going to beat the holy garbage out of it. You're just going to beat the heck out of it. So you don't want to be able to, bang it into something or whatever and have to cry because you just put this big gouge down your, Turkish walnut stock with 50 layers of hand-rubbed lacquer on it. You don't want that. You want something you just go, boom, oh, well, whatever, and get on with the job, right? You've been patient, and here's your reward. Thanks for staying with us. Now, my recommendation for the one do-it-all cartridge, and by the way, if you can only have one gun to hunt with, I did another video on the top 5 cartridges for the one gun hunter. Put the link down there in the description. Go check that out. People really like it, and for some reason, they find it very valuable. One cartridge to do it all. In my opinion, for all these species, I would take a 300 Win Mag. It's got reach to get out there on those pesky elk and mule deer that are way across draws and the other side of a canyon or sitting on a butte or something. Superb gun for that. Plenty of reach for pronghorn, nice flat trajectory, and of course it's got the power. You can use a 300 Win Mag all the way up to even including Kodiaks with the proper bullet and the proper placement. It is a good all-around cartridge. Yeah, you're going to pay for it with some recoil, but the recoil is not as bad as, say, the 375, and certainly not as bad as that 416. But yeah, you're going to get thumped a little bit. But maybe this is just your cue to toughen up a little bit and get used to some recoil. Work your way into it slow. Start with, something soft and then just work your way up. Don't just jump into it. But if I had to take only one cartridge and I could only hunt with that one cartridge in North America, I would take the 300 Win Mag. There you have it. How to use enough gun when hunting North American big game. Hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for taking your valuable time and spending it with us at the LocaCarnivore today. This is the way.
Mwahaha!